So we found that when 25-hydroxy is added to the diet, it actually helps that immune response, kind of kicks it into a higher gear, increases those anti-inflammatory markers, those cytokines, decreases those pro-inflammatory, has an effect on the dendritic, the T cells, the B cells. And so the way I like to think of it is it's kind of taking the immune system and giving it another kick, getting it into higher gear and keeping that bird inflammation low, the energy less required. And so we can make sure we have enough for that bird to be able to continue to grow and develop.
Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Corbin. I'm one of the hosts of the Poultry Podcast Show. Welcome to our latest installment. If you find this interview interesting and useful, please let us know by visiting our website at wisenetics.com. You can also learn more about our other podcast segments covering poultry, swine, dairy, beef, feed milling, and pet food. And of course, you can always feel free to suggest a new guest as well. Our guest today is Shelby Corray, who has a master's degree in science and an MBA, and she is the technical service manager for dsm-firmenich. Welcome to the program, Shelby.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your role as technical service manager. What does that involve?
Yeah, so I'm really there for the research on our side. We have quite a large product portfolio at dsm-firmenich, and I am leading the charge with the high D research that we do along with some vitamins.
So how did you come to this current position? What was your education or career path?
Yeah, so I born and raised on a farm in East Central Illinois. So agriculture is in my blood. It's what I did. It's my life. So I knew I would be in ag in some way. I had birds growing up. We did all kinds of projects, FFA. So kind of slowly directed me towards poultry. I found a love for nutrition while I was in college at Iowa State and headed down that path. Got to go to University of Illinois with Dr. Carl Parsons as my professor and get my master's in poultry nutrition there. And then I was lucky enough to start with DSM right after I finished my master's degree, actually working on some of our mini pens with our customers and doing research trials in the field, in the barns. So that led me to some unique experience there before I was able to move over and join the technical service team with DSM.
Are you working only with poultry or do you cover other species as well?
Yeah, specifically poultry. I did quite a bit of swine stuff in grad school, but now at DSM, poultry, but all the species. So broilers, broiler breeders, layers, turkeys.
All right. Interesting.
Looking for an alternative to traditional coccidiosis management? dsm-firmenich can help. Digesterom Pepi is not an anticoccidial. It is an in-feed alternative that has a unique formulation incorporating carefully selected and diverse essential oils and yucca with specific biologically active properties and can be incorporated into rotation and shuffle programs to support a cost-effective coccidiosis management strategy. Learn more at dsm.com/ANH-NA.
So let's talk about vitamin D. We know that animals are capable of synthesizing their own vitamin D if they have exposure to ultraviolet light. So why is it so important for the poultry industry, the dietary supplementation?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, livestock anymore is not raised outside. And even if birds were outside, the conversion rate from vitamin D3 from the sun for birds is pretty low. And so they're not going to get those adequate levels in their blood to be able to have enough 25-hydroxy-D3. And so it's been really important to have that vitamin D3 in the diet. And then we've learned further that having that metabolite, 25-hydroxy-D3, is specifically important as that conversion from D3 to that metabolite is not real efficient in the bird. Only about 60% or so gets converted.
Okay. Can you go over the basics of vitamin D metabolism for the audience?
Sure. So vitamin D3, when added into the diet, has to go through a few different steps before it can become its active form in that 125. And so it starts with vitamin D3. It goes to the liver. That's where it's going to be hydroxylated into that metabolite we talk about, 25-hydroxy vitamin D3. From there, that metabolite's going to go to the kidney and be hydroxylated again. And then we're at our active form of the 125. Now that circulating form, the 25-hydroxy-D3, that's what we find in the blood. That's what we're going to measure to see what our levels are at. And that's what's really important to make sure we're keeping those levels at an adequate level in the blood so that we can make sure we're having the benefits that those have. Now, when we feed directly at 25-hydroxy-D3, we can skip that liver hydroxylation step. We're going directly to the blood form that's in the blood and circulating. And that is really beneficial for birds because if they've got any sort of liver deficiency or they're having disease, sometimes a vaccine, coccidiosis vaccine, can interfere with fat absorption. Birds, when they're real young, also don't have the high lipase and bile acids that they need to absorb that vitamin D fat molecule because it needs fat to be able to get into the blood and change into that form. And so when we feed directly 25-hydroxy-D3, we're able to bypass any of those issues the bird might be having or if a young bird has low fat metabolism. So it's quite beneficial to make sure we get those adequate levels in the blood for the bird.
Mm-hmm. So obviously vitamin D and the 25-hydroxy-D3 are related in structure. Are there any differences in absorption from the gut?
Yes. So gut absorption for vitamin D is around 60 to 70% absorbed, whereas that 25-hydroxy-D3 is greater than 90%. We've often found about 93 to 95% absorption rate. So again, quite a few differences there, and the benefits can be observed in the bird once you feed that 25-hydroxy.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the benefits of that 25-hydroxy vitamin D3?
Sure. So often when we think about vitamin D, we think about bones. And I think that's pretty obvious to most people. It's involved in that calcium and phosphorus, blood homeostasis, bone, skeletal health. Those benefits have been well established for many years. And that's still true today. If we're having any sort of issues with the skeletal bone and just development of the bone, differentiation of that bone, calcium, phosphorus uptake and utilization are all very important and why we need vitamin D and 25-hydroxy-D3 levels to remain at a good level above 10 or 15 nanograms per mil in the blood to make sure we're getting that optimized bone formation. There are, though, other benefits that we've tried to do some more research on, and we've been quite successful at determining the mode of action there. And we know that there are some non-classical benefits with immune modulation, cell differentiation, muscle growth and development, reproduction. All of those have an effect when 25-hydroxy-D3 is fed. So some of those can, include muscle differentiation, growth, satellite cell proliferation, some of the immune markers. It's been able to help with lesions, with coccidiosis decretion, with helping a bit with cytokines and improving some anti-inflammatory cytokines, some pro-inflammatory cytokines. And so we've observed many benefits other than just the bone, but also with immune and muscle development as well.
So as it relates to, say, breast meat yield, what are some of the modes of action that result in that?
And so some of the mode of actions when we looked at breast meat yield, we were running, several trials and seeing that we kept having increase in breast meat weight and yield, some log yield. And so we determined we needed to run a study to look at what exactly was happening with that muscle growth stimulation. And we found that the stimulation of satellite cells, which are really important for that muscle fiber size. We also did some breeder work looked at the chicks afterwards. And if 25-hydroxy or high D was fed to those breeders, we saw more muscle fibers in number in those chicks, which is important because as the chick is hatched, it's set with how many muscle fiber number of fibers it's going to have. So the only effect you can have once they've hatched is muscle fiber size. And so we found that high D was able to increase the muscle fiber number in chicks and the size. Also had an impact on the stimulation of protein synthesis. And so if we had a higher protein synthesis rate, we're going to get more meat in that end target. Some of the other myogenic factors like MYO5, some of mTOR, S6K1, all of those are very important for protein synthesis and muscle development. And all of those were very significantly impacted when a 25-hydroxy-D3 was fed to the breeders or to the broiler chicks themselves.
How about the effect on immune function?
Yeah, immune function is another really big one that we've found. And so we know that, when a bird has any sort of challenge, pathogen, environmental challenge, disease, the body is going to stimulate those lymphocytes, macrophages, the cytokines. It's really going to kick into gear and have that immune response, often leading to inflammation and a lot of energy required to keep that bird in a healthy state. And so we've found that when 25-hydroxy is added to the diet, it actually helps that immune response, kind of kicks it into a higher gear, increases those anti-inflammatory markers, those cytokines, decreases those pro-inflammatory, has an effect on the dendritic, the T cells, the B cells. And so the way I like to think of it is it's kind of taking the immune system and giving it another kick, getting it into higher gear and keeping that bird inflammation low, the energy less required. And so we can make sure we have enough for that bird to be able to continue to grow and develop and do what they need as far as that goes. We've heard from many producers that when they have an immune challenge and they're using high D in their diets, that the birds that have high D seem to recover quicker. They seem to have a shorter amount of time that they're dealing with inflammation or disease. And so we know it's had quite a bit of direct and indirect effects on the immune system of the bird.
I'd like to remind our audience that if you find this or any of our other previous topics worthwhile and informative, please subscribe to the Poultry Podcast Show YouTube channel. And you can do this by clicking on the bell icon to receive our notifications. You can also share this video if you learned something new today. So Shelby, does dsm-firmenich have any new and exciting trial results from your high D studies?
Yeah, so recently, in the last couple of years, we've been doing quite a bit with looking at vitamin D3, 25-hydroxy-D3 or high D in the feed, and then on top of that in the water. And there could be some benefits, especially when we know the bird's going to go into a stressful period of time, whether that's moving barns, at hatch, during vaccination, or for turkeys, vaccination or worming days. Some of those stressful events that happen during that growth cycle, it's really helpful if we have high D in the water, maybe just a couple days a week. And so to test that out, we've done some work with broilers and with turkeys. With turkeys, we actually were able to get into the field, use a couple different barns. One did not have any high D in the water, only in the feed. And then we had another barn that had high D in the feed and in the water. And what we looked at were the biomarkers in the blood to try to see how we were having an impact. And we ended up seeing that high D in the water at just 3 days a week was able to get those birds a nice boost, reduce the inflammation. The birds ended up having a bit of a disease challenge through the trial, which was kind of nice to see in the field. And we were able to see that barn with high D in the water improve quite a bit. Traditionally, it had been a couple pounds lighter at processing. That barn just always performed the worst. And so we made sure to put the high D in the water in that barn. It ended up being a pound heavier for the first time in this farm's history. And so that was great to see, really almost a 3-pound growth difference. And I really just attribute that to the birds being able to recover more from those stressful time points. The mortality was lower by about 25% in the high D barn with the water. And so we found that those days they had pulsed high D, that next day the birds were thriftier. They seemed to go to the water more, go to the feed more, and have less challenging times. And so that was really impactful and something new that we're hoping to explore further by looking at those blood biomarkers and cytokines for turkeys. We've seen very similar things with broilers as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it was something unique about the water provision of the high D, or is it, what do you think the cause is? Is it just an amount?
Sure. So we kind of looked at the blood in the turkeys prior to receiving that water dose of high D, and we kept those levels in the turkeys around 20 to 25 nanograms per mil, which is a great range. We typically want to see between, they say 10 to 20. I like to see more 15 to 30 in birds. And so when we were able to keep them in that 15 to 20 range, that was pretty good. However, once we then added in the high D in the water on top of that, again, pulsed it just 3 days a week, we would then take the blood 24 hours after that, and we get it up to that 30, 35 nanograms per mil. And so it was quite obvious that the birds needed that boost. They were able to get more in their blood, and it was having an impact on their immune performance. So I think it just goes to show that keeping the levels higher in the blood, so around 30 nanograms per mil, can be quite impactful on the health and performance of the birds.
I know that in various countries, some of the challenges with vitamin D supplementation relate to how much the maximum limit for vitamin D supplementation is. So I'm here in Canada, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has just recently published some updated vitamin D regulations. What do those regulations look like for the poultry industry in Canada?
Yeah. We were so happy to hear that. I know our Canadians have been looking forward to this. We've had customers ask for years if they could feed more, and unfortunately they just couldn't because of the strict regulations on that 5,500 IUs per kilo. And so that really only allowed a pretty lower dose of vitamin D3 and then our recommended level of high D. And so what this is going to allow for is for them to use that water supplementation if they so choose. It could allow them to feed more vitamin D along with the high D in their feed. It's also going to allow them to add some more high D. And this is going to be impactful because we've done many studies looking at, different dose titrations and a dose response of 25-hydroxy, anywhere from the 2760 IUs per kilo all the way up to over 10,000. And with breeders and layers, broilers and turkeys, we can see that anywhere from that 3,000 to 5,000, the benefits continue to increase. And so we're kind of set on our recommendation of the 2,760 IUs per kilo, but the benefits are immense when we go past that as well. And so this really gives them that option. If they're having a stressful time, if there's vaccination days coming up, if they know that, they know the birds are struggling maybe the first 7 days of life, struggling with 7-day mortality, they can add in that extra high D to try to help. And same thing with the layers too. If we look at late lay and some of the issues that layers tend to have once they're later in their lay cycle, the requirement actually goes up a little bit. And we seem to be seeing that the benefits can be increased if we go beyond the 5,500 IU. So it's really going to allow them more flexibility to be able to use high D in a couple different ways, whatever might benefit them.
Mm-hmm. So what are the current limits now in Canada?
Yeah, so the current limits now for broilers are 6,500 IUs per kilo. And then it's up even higher than that to almost 10,000 IUs per kilo for some of the other poultry species. So again, quite an improvement. And we've also seen some improvements on the pig side too. So a little plug there for the pig people. They can also get quite excited as it was quite low for them before. So with those levels, they'll be able to use our recommended dose in the water and in the feed on top and still be within that range now, whereas before they would have been over. So,
are you seeing similar trends in legislation and restrictions and regulations in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world as well, or is Canada kind of unique?
I think Canada had more of the restriction than some of the other countries did on the maximum level, but we have seen some changes in the EU also in the last few years. In the US, I'm not sure there'll be any legislation anytime soon, but the levels can be fed a bit higher also in the US as well. There's not that cap of 5,000 IU. So again, I think just allowing for that flexibility to be able to use it how they need, specifically in the water, if they want to add it on top of the feed, is going to be really helpful, I think. And just another tool to have in the toolbox, especially for turkeys who seem to have very few tools as they do now. So.
Yeah, and I remember Colin Whitehead from the Roslin Institute published a really nice paper quite a few years back showing that the legal restrictions in a lot of countries, including the EU, were really far below probably what was required and certainly far below what was problematic in terms of any toxicities. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's definitely room still to continue that research, try to push for allow for some higher levels, because there's absolutely benefits and safety too, up to 10x the dose. So we know that the bird can benefit from more, and it's not going to harm them by any means if we feed above those levels.
So what's next for high D? Are there new applications, or what does it look like going forward?
Yeah, I think going forward, some of the things we're wanting to get more in depth with are looking at the biomarkers and seeing that impact. And so, often we talk about feed additives and we talk about feed conversion and we talk about body weight, maybe some mortality, and that's all great. And I feel like it's almost expected at this point for those supplements to give some sort of performance boost, but to find out really what's going on beneath the surface, we have a great idea of the mode of action, but to maybe see some of those markers in the blood, I think would be really helpful to see how we're impacting that bird. And so now that we're getting our blood biomarker equipment and systems really up and going, we're getting that information out there to customers. It would be great to start looking at high D a little bit more like we did in the turkeys with some of the breeders and broilers and in baby chicks too, to see how we could have an impact. And if increasing levels might be beneficial. We've done quite a bit with water and the water high D in the feed, looking at the different ratios of those. So that's something in my future as well, setting up some trials to look at the ratio of the feed to the water to the vitamin D3 and what really is optimal based on what the blood biomarkers look like. And so that's something we're looking forward to continuing to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the availability of a water-delivered product gives producers flexibility in terms of maybe a spot application under particular conditions. Is there a way that producers can monitor the vitamin D status of their flock so that they can respond?
Yeah, that's a great question. So traditionally, we're able to look at blood. Of course, we can measure it in the water. We can measure it in the feed to see what there is in there. But to actually look at what's in the bird, we'd have to pull blood and look at that traditionally. We now have a dried blood spot analysis. So this is new, not new to the world. We've been using it for humans for many years. They use it on babies all the time. I know when both my kids were born, they used those dry blood spot cards, and it's very nice because it's just a small prick, a little bit of blood to fill up that card, and then you're done. And it can tell you a lot of information. And so they've been able to develop that for poultry. And now we have these cards that only require drops of blood. They don't have to be kept in dry ice and all of that complication, sent off to the lab. And in a matter of days, we can have the 25-hydroxy blood serum level for birds. And so this is going to be really nice for producers because it's not going to require a skill to be able to get a needle and draw blood from that wing vein. Now we can just simply prick and put on the blood spot and send it off. And so that'll be nice to be able to monitor, what's going on in the bird, if the levels are adequate or not, and if it might require some additional supplementation. So that's actually something new that we're offering. We're starting to get out there with customers now and start taking those levels. And it's been quite successful with good results. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that is exciting. The ability to monitor in the very short term and respond to situations that might benefit from supplementation.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's look bigger picture now. How long have you been at your position with DSM?
Yeah, so I've been with DSM for almost 8 years now, within the tech service and looking after high D research for almost 5 years.
Okay. So in that time and looking forward, what do you see as the biggest challenges for the poultry industry?
Yeah, I think, it feels like we have a lot of tools, but maybe some things are not working as efficiently as they used to. Maybe the birds are getting immune to some of the other supplements. There's a lot of things flooding the market, a lot of noise. And so I think the issue is really trying to find what works for you. And what I love so much about high D and our 25 hydroxy supplement is that it's proven, it's consistent. I feel like it's something the bird's not going to become immune to it. It's always going to have that impact and it's always going to be required. Probiotics, there's a lot of things we could talk about with feed additives and maybe why they work for some and not for others. But that's just really not the case with 25 hydroxy. So with any issues I see in the future, I really do see a place for high D and how it can help any of the industry at all, whether it's necrotic enteritis challenges, which seems to always be a challenge, and I think it probably always will be, or if it's AI or any other disease challenges that come along. This is just kind of one of those tools that we can always count on to at least assist a bit with some of those challenges.
Well, Shelby, thanks a lot for taking the time today to speak with us on the Poultry Podcast Show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I was glad to be here and talk about high D.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed this interview, please give us a thumbs up on the platform you're using to view this product. I'm Doug Korver, and I'll be seeing you next time on the Poultry Podcast Show.